So I can start. You can all hear me clearly. Alright, so without wasting much time, I'm going to have to cut out those parts I was asking questions. So welcome to our July webinar, and this month we'll be discussing a very interesting topic, and I'm really excited to share with you on Excel VBA. For two things. Number one, it's a lot of people think it's really difficult. I've met people who are very good with Excel, and then when it comes to the VBA aspect, they totally blank out. They you have this mindset of it's something very difficult, it's for the core programming guys, and then they keep saying, some even say there's nothing you can do with the VBA that they cannot do with the formulas. So today I'm going to demystify it and hopefully get you to be favorably disposed to wanting to learn it, to use it. So here is what we're going to go through today. I'm going to start with how you record VBA macros, right? So we're going to be recording, and then we're going to go to, I'm going to walk you through how you tie it to a button, tie the macro to a button, and every other thing you need to do to make your VBA work really nice. Then we're going to do some small calculations that will expose us to the inside of Excel VBA. Some small calculations that would force us to do things like we'll walk through the for loop. So there will be if loop. So I'm going to walk you through if loop. I'm going to walk you through for loop. I'm going to walk you through for each loop. And if you have any question, do ask, right? So I'll be monitoring the chat box, and then okay, so any question, please do ask. So I'll be taking us through the for loop, the for each loop, the do loop, the do while loop, and you'll find that all these things are really interesting. The do until loop, and I'll show us how we work with the message box, and finally user form. And by the time we are up to this stage, I'll also share with you the file, so you'll be able to use it, and all the codes I'm typing, you'll be able to go through them and hopefully modify for your own future use. So these are what I have on the agenda today, and let's get started. So we're going to walk through this particular task, right? So maybe what I'll do is I'll move it here. Okay, so this is the task we're going to keep working through. Well, I want us to generate random numbers. Generate numbers from 1 to 200, right? So how can I do this normally? And here is how I will have done this, as an Excel person. So I said I write 1, I write 2, and then I keep dragging. Okay, and that does it, right? So this is a very simple example because I don't want to use an example that will be too complex that you will miss out from the core concepts I want to explain. Now, what is the main use of VBA? So VBA use, there are some things formula cannot automate for you. Formula can't do. You might ask things like what, right? So things like insert charts, copy, paste data, insert objects like pictures, pivot table, even import another Excel file, import data, change font, even things as simple as change fonts, and you get the whole concept. So there are some things that formulas can't do. So you will always have situations where you need to really automate something, and then you have come to the end of the line with formulas. So this is where VBA begins to really shine. There is nothing you can do that you cannot do with VBA, because everything you do in Excel is being translated into a program, and that the Excel carries out. So now what you're doing with VBA is you are now actually writing the program that runs whenever you click on stuffs in Excel. So when I click on bold, instead of me doing the clicking, if I know the specific program, the code word, I can go into VBA and type that code word, and that will happen, right? So that's what I mean when I say there is nothing you do that you cannot do with VBA. But then there are some things you can't do with formula. So that's the explanation. So let's go straight in, without wasting much time. If you have any question, please do let me know. So how am I going to record macro for this, right? Though in this illustration, this is something you could still be able to do with formula. So let's not bother too much about is VBA really necessary for what I'm doing. No, that's not the main picture. The main idea is let's use VBA to do something really small that will help you understand how it works. So here's the task: generate numbers from 1 to 200. I've done it manually, right? So how will I do this with VBA? So let's start with recording macro. So I'm going to start with this recording macro. So if I'm going to record macro, I'm going to record a VBA macro, right? Number one thing is this: I would advise that you enable the developer tab. So you might not have this. Now, how do you enable this? Very easy. Go to File, and then you go to Options, and then you go to Customize Ribbon, and under Customize Ribbon, you'll see at this right hand side you'll see Developer, right? So you can tick it, and you'll be able to, maybe in yours it will be unticked, so you just make sure it's ticked, and that way you have the Developer tab. Okay, great. So once you have the Developer tab, I want you to pay attention to two places. This Developer tab here, so now you will have a Developer tab, and then I need you to pay attention to this lower left corner. So this is the record macro button. So for the record macro, that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to start with it. So I click on where I want to put the numbers 1 to 200. I click on the record macro button. So I'm going to call this generate numbers. So I'm going to call it generate numbers. Okay. Okay. To make this a little more interesting, maybe I'll start from a really fresh file, right? So that way you'll be able to. That way you'll be able to see how you even save a macro file, because this one I'm working with is already saved as macro. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as, and so I'm going to save as, and create as an ordinary Excel file. Great. Or okay, better still, maybe what I'll do is I'll create a new Excel file. So completely new Excel file. Alright, so because ultimately when you are going to work on macro, that's what you'll be doing. You'll be using a completely new Excel file, right? So I'm just going to copy paste what I have in here so I can use that one for the illustration henceforth. Okay, alright. Okay, so I'm going to do the record macro button. I'll call this generate numbers. So the key thing is use text. Well, the real rule is don't use any special symbol except underscore. So it expects alphabets, no special symbol except underscore. Then you can use numbers, but the numbers must not be at the beginning of the name. So not to make you remember too many rules, just stick to text only. no space, no special characters. Then I can tie it to a macro button. So I can say I want to tie this to advice is use a macro button that Excel, use a keyboard shortcut that Excel doesn't use for anything. So like M, L, K. I use K sometimes, but that's the shortcut for hyperlink. So let's use L this time around. So I've given it a macro name. I've said I'm using keyboard shortcut Control L. If you have time, you can put in a description, but I don't have time. So I go ahead, we click OK. And then I come in here and say 1, 2, and I'm going to drag this down. So up till 200. Okay. So once I'm done, I click on that same place I clicked to start the macro recording. So I click on that, and that stops the macro recording, right? So what have I done? What I've achieved is this. So I'm going to delete what I've done. So what I've done is I've recorded that entire step in a macro button. So if I need to do this, maybe this is a daily thing I do. There is a daily report I create that I need to first generate 200 numbers. This can do a lot more. So I can even use it to replicate the entire report, right? So tomorrow, so let's say it's already another day. I need to do all those things again. But because I've recorded a macro, I've recorded all my steps, so I've done that record macro. I can call up that keyboard shortcut, Control L, and see what happens. Instantly, it repeats all what I've done, right? Now, the next thing you want to do is, it's in real life, you wouldn't want to leave it tied to a keyboard shortcut because you will not probably remember what the keyboard shortcut is. And if it is a file you're planning to share with your colleagues, you don't expect them to remember that it's Control L. So the next thing is you want to tie it to a macro button. So you go to Developer tab, and then you come to Insert. You'll see all these form controls. So this is the button. The first one is a button. So I'm going to pick it, and then I'll draw button of, say, this size. Immediately I finish doing the drawing, it's going to bring up this assign macro box, right? So sorry for the thing going off. Okay, right. So I'm going to bring up that assign macro box, and it will ask me to pick the macro I'm assigning it to. So I'm assigning it to the macro I created in this particular file, which is this generate numbers, right? So I pick it. That's all you need to do. Pick it and do OK, and instantly it assigns it to that, right? So I'm going to want to change that name from button 1. So right click on the button. So I right click on it, and then I'm going to edit the text. So I'm going to change this to and say generate 1 to 200, right? So once I'm done giving it the name I want, and that's it. So now anytime I need to run that macro, all I need to do is click on this button, and voila, it's done. So that is how you tie a macro to a button. So we're done with this stage, right? I'm going to share with you this file, so and then this is a video. You can always play back in case if you feel I'm too fast. You can always, the recording will be available on YouTube. You can always replay the aspects you want to see me do again. So I'm done with those 2 steps. Now how about we using from the back end? So what we've done is we've recorded our steps, but all those steps we recorded, they were generating codes. Let me show you what I mean. If you click on macro here, right, it's going to bring up all the macros you've created, right? So in this case, you see I've created just one macro, generate numbers. If you click on it and you do edits, so I do edit, it's going to take me into that. So this is the macro, this is the code behind. So every single thing I was doing, I selected cell A, I selected cell A and typed in 1. I selected cell 2, A2, I typed in 2, and then I selected both, and then I dragged, and then so this was the dragging I did, and so all those steps I did, this is what the codes behind. If I know how to write this code, then I don't need to go through the process of clicking record macro and doing all those multiple click here and there and repeating my step. I could just straight away write the code, right? So that's what we're going to do next. So let me show you how you start using macros for small calculations. So we're going to again do this kind of calculation, right? So to do that, I click on macros here, and then I'm going to give, because I want to create a new macro, so I'm going to give it a new name. So I'm going to call it gen num. So I'll call it gen num1, right? The other time I say stick to alphabets, right? But because I want to create many macros, so that's why I'm having to use it. But again, the rule is if you're going to put numbers, let them be not at the beginning. So I can't come in here and say one gen num, right? I have to put the number somewhere that is not in the beginning. So gen num1, it's a valid name. All I need to do after putting the name I want is I say create. The moment I do create, instantly it takes me back here. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm monitoring the chat box. So it takes me back here, and then I can type in exactly what I want to do. So what was it I wanted to do? It's very straightforward. I want to go to cell A1. So, and how do you call up a cell in macro? So it's called range. So instead of me saying just ordinary A1, I'm going to say range, then in inverted commas, right? Range A1. So that's cell A1. I want to put in for the value property. I want to say the value is 1, right? So that is the equivalent of, typing in 1 here, right? If I run this, that's what will happen. 1 will come up in here. You can run it, you can test in case you're doing stuff and you want to check if what you're doing is making sense. So I can go ahead and run. See, that has created the 1 there. So I'm going to delete that anyway, because I want to finish it then run it again, right? So now I'm done with typing A1. Now the next thing is I want Excel to fill it. So I want it to fill series. So what I mean by fill series is this. You come in here, you type 1, and then you want to fill. So I'm going to select, I'm going to drag it down. So I'm going to drag it down, and after dragging it, I'm going to come in here and say fill series, right? And that will do for me 1 to 200. But now I'm doing that from the macro end, writing the code, right? So it's very straightforward. All I need to do is simply, range A1, right? Dot autofill destination, and as per these codes, you will notice that I'm having some help here. So sometimes it's not that you have to know all the code offhand. I use a lot of Google help, so if you check out my Google, you see minus, okay, what's running? Oh, I think I've closed some of the pages. I do a lot of search online, so I need to do something. Once I break down the steps, I can go online and search, okay, what's the VBA code for autofill? So if you search for it, VBA code for autofill, you're going to get them. So you don't have to memorize anything, just have the sequence in your mind. If I was to do this thing normally in Excel, these are the steps I'm going to take. Then try and figure out how you write out those steps, in VBA. So there are some that I do a lot, and then after you keep doing them, you get, it becomes like, part of you. You don't have to go search online to see them. And sometimes I even do record macro, like this one I'm doing now. You can see what I'm typing in is very similar to this, right? So I could have done that and gotten the code. So whichever one you find easy for you, though for me I usually find searching online faster rather than recording macro. And so I'm going to say from A1, down to A200, right? So it's going to autofill it from A1 to, which was the that selection I was doing the other time. And finally, the type of selection, type of filling I want. So I want, if you remember the other time, I picked series, right? So I want auto Excel fill series, and that is it. Now these two lines of code is going to do for me exactly what I did with all of these record macro that you're seeing here. So if I run it, can you see? And done, right? So that's how you can do calculations with macro. All you need to do is just think about it. If I'm going to do this in Excel, what are the very steps I'm going to take? And then try to get the representative code, the code that would do those steps for you, right? Okay, so we're done with this. Let's go to loops. Loops are very powerful in Excel. When it comes to programming, you have to be very familiar with using loops, because they are the real bonus. They are what actually makes VBA a lifesaver. So think about it. I'm trying to do a report for, say, maybe 12 different departments, but the steps are the same. So I'm going to do the same thing but different raw data file, right? But now I'm going to probably need to import the file from somewhere and then bring into Excel and do for each sheet. Now you can't use formula to import. There's a limit to how much you can use formula. Formula can only automate the calculations, not even all, maybe just some of the calculations. Maybe it can generate charts. Formulas cannot automatically generate charts, and there are some limitations to formulas, right? So if I'm really wanting to automate that entire report, I'll be needing to use VBA. Now what will I be using again in the ends? I'll be saying for each department. So I'm just going to be writing one main code and telling it to run for each department. So that's what we mean by loop. Something that loops, does for the same thing but does it multiple times. So that's what I'm going to use now for this same example. So what I'm basically doing is simply writing one and adding an extra. So this is like writing one and saying this is equal to 1, what was here, plus 1. And then if this were a loop, I would just simply keep taking what was there, adding 1 to it. So, and keep doing that loop until I get to 200. So that's what I'm going to do now. But I'm going to use if loop. So let's start with if loop. Again, I'll come to macro. I'll say the macro I want to do now. Let's name it genum2. So create. Okay, great. So one more thing. If you have option explicit set, so I think I set it myself, or or during the record macro. I think record macro sets it. But anyway, what I want to point out is it's an optional thing. You can delete it if it's there. If it's not there, you can put it, right? So I could have put it myself. But when it's there, it means whatever you use must be declared. So that brings us to variables. Okay, I've not written variables yet. So that brings us to what we call variables, right? So I'm going to explain that some more. Okay, great. So this is what I want to do. I want to say if a particular variable, so let's say high, I'm going to call the variable high. If high is less than or equal to 200, right, then I need Excel to go to a range of A and AI. So when high is 1, it will be A1, and then like that A to A3. So A high, right, dot value should be equal to high, and then I need it to auto increment high. So high should now increase by 1, right? And then I'm going to, so how do I make Excel keep doing this? I'm going to use what we call goto. This is in the end, you should not be using goto, but I need to just use it to explain how I'm going to use if to solve this, right? So what I want Excel to do is, as long as high is less than or equal to 200, it should always come back to, so I'm going to call this repeats. So these are set the loop. So I'll say it should go to repeats, right? Otherwise, Excel should do nothing or exit sub. So let me use the common one you will see a lot. So you see exit sub. So it should just exit. It shouldn't do anything, right? But I could have just left it, or in fact I could have simply, ended my if statement. So I just wanted to let you know that we have options. You could set, else, if in case if it's not met, so what should you do? And there's else, there's else if, right? So let's just leave it the way it is, right? So I'm going to say I need you to. So now you will notice I'm using high here, right? What is high? So I'm going to have to come here and define and say high. I want to define it as an integer. So these are what we call declaring your variables, and this will be very compulsory if I have this. But if I don't have this, I can get away with not declaring. Then I'm also going to do one more thing. I'm going to initialize it. So I'm going to say high in the beginning is equal to 1. Right? So now I'm done. So I'm going to say high is equals to 1. Then as long as high is not more than 200, this thing should run and go come back here and like that. So let's see if it's going to work, right? So just, and voila, it works, right? So now I've used if loop to do the very same thing that I did with this one, right? So I hope you are getting me. Let me just check if there are any questions. I'm going to check the chat box. Okay. Okay, so seems no question yet. Any question? So any questions? I can see some of my Excel family members are in house. Okay. All right, so I'm done with explaining if. So this is that's actually the way if works. The aspect I need you to just pay attention to is if something happens, then do this. Otherwise, just don't do it. There is also I could have gone ahead and said else if it's greater than 200, then something else. So else if I is greater than 200, then I want Excel to say something else. So maybe what should be the something else? So else if I could use, so that brings us to message box. Message box is like a prompt, like a dialog box. So I can say, I can put anything I want it to prompt. I can say, number more than 200. You can put whatsoever you want in there, and now this will happen whenever this is this condition is now met. So let's see. I'm going to delete all of this again, and then I'm going to come back in here, and then I'm going to say run, and you see I get the message box. So what happened is the moment it got to this place, the message box ran. And if there's only one more thing that could have happened, maybe instead of me having to do else if, I could have just done else. So as long as this condition is met, just any other thing, do this. And if I run it again, you will see that the same thing will happen, right? Okay, so I'm done with explaining if. So let's go to for. So I'm going to go to for. So I'm going to do another macro. I'm going to call this 3 and then create. So how will I use for loop to do the very same thing? Okay, so let's see. Again, I'm going to want to use a variable, so dim high as integer, and I'm going to initialize it. Okay, in this case I'm not going to initialize. I'm just going to say for I equal to 1 to 200, right? I need range. It's a common thing for us to indent whenever you are using the loops to indent the body of code within the loop. So for high equals to 1 to 200, I need range, so, hey, and then join to high dot value should be what? Should be equal to high, and that is it. So I'm going to, for this one, you just do next. So for high equals to 1 to 200, hey and high dot value equals to high. So let's run it, and then we'll see what happens. And voila, see, it's done. So again, the very same thing, but now I'm using for loop. Okay, so that's how for loop works. It's a for, you provide range. You can also provide step. In this case, the default step is 1, but if you don't want to use step 1, maybe I want to go in steps of, maybe I just want to print out I don't know, what will I say I want to print out odd numbers, so I can go in step of 2, right? So let's see what will happen if I've done that. So if I do that, what will happen is I'll be getting 1 3, see. So it will just keep going in steps of 1 3 4, taking 2 steps ahead. And so that's the only optional thing I want you to know. So maybe I'll just leave it as step 1, or wipe out the step, or maybe I'll comment it out. So step 2. So this is how you comment in Excel. In VBA, you put a single apostrophe sign, so that you have that there anyway. So I'm going to delete this again, and then I will run this, and you will see how it works, right? So it works. All right, so we are done with using for. Next is I'm going to do save. When we are done, I'm going to show you how you will save properly. So let me not save at this moment. So we are done with for. Let's go to for each. Again, let me check if you have any question. Okay, so I can see is I usable only in that sub? Yes. So the variable, in this case high, I'm typing the answer from my phone. It's a little tricky. So the variable high in this case, it's usable only only in the sub you defined it. So it's usable in the sub you defined it, or declared it, whichever one. Declare. And must one create a macro for every function? Must you create a macro for every function? What would be the best way to put this answer now? Okay, if I want everything I want to run at once. Okay, I want to do a gigantic report, but I want it to be done all at once. So I click on just one button, and then it just keeps running all at once, right? So in a traditional way, let me say it in a crude way, I will just do one macro, one sub, so one subroutine for it. But then again, I can break down the program into, so there's what we call functional programming, where I can decide to do one sub for every unique step. So I can do a sub that will, maybe I'm doing a report that is going to import data from maybe there's a folder we're going to be putting in. Every day we're putting new files in that folder. So I'm going to do, if I'm trying to do a macro, that we go into that folder every day, and then import every new file in that folder. So every file that has been put in that folder, and then go ahead and do some analysis, and then also maybe create charts, and maybe in the end email the report out. If I want, I can do it in one giant macro macro subroutine. So I can do it as one giant program. Otherwise, I can also do it as maybe 4 different programs. So I'm going to call one the one that will import the different files from the folder, and then another one that will now do the analysis, and then another one that will create the charts, maybe another one that will email out the report. So what will happen is, in the one that will import the file, I can tell it to call. So once it's done importing, it should call the other macro, the other sub. And then when the one, which in this case we mean, it will call the one that will do the analysis. So when the one that will do the analysis is also done, that one should call the one that will generate the chart. So you can create as many as you want. So it just depends on how your coding style. Some people like to keep separation of concerns. Keep each macro not too um, gigantic, not too big, and make them carry out just one major function. And so every main function in their analysis, they want to create different macros for them, and then let one macro call the other one. So I hope I've answered your question. Grace. So I'm going to move on. Any question, you can drop it. So I hope I've answered your questions. So any more question, please do use the chat box. I'm monitoring. So let's move on to for each. And again, I'm going to come to macro. I'll call this gen num4 create. So the same, and one more thing. Okay, so the same sequence. So I'm going to use for each. No need. So for each, I don't even need that. I don't need the variable. Okay, any question? All right, thank you. So I'm going to say for each. Okay, I think I'm going to need a variable. I'm going to dim a variable and say dim cell. So the thing is, if you're creating variables, make sure you use names that Excel VBA has not reserved internally. So I can't call a variable cell. I can't call another variable range. I can't call a variable loop. There are some words I can't call a variable for. So there are some keywords. So that's why it's very common that you see us deliberately misspell those words if we really want to use them. So that's why I'm going to misspell cell as C-double-L. So I'm going to say this is a range. So cells are declared as range. All these things you work with in Excel, a cell, a group of cells, if you are declaring them, is as range, right? Okay, so what I'll do next is, now I'm going to say for each cell in range A1 to A200, right? So next, so always right, it's always a for next. You can see for next, so it's always for next. So what do I want Excel to do? Okay. This is getting a little tricky. Okay, I'll do some modification. So I'm going to say, maybe I'll first of all initialize the first term. So I'm going to say range. That's where thinking through what you want to do is actually the biggest part of Excel macro. Once you can think it through, how will I do this thing manually? Then how can I now make the code behind to do this very same thing? So what I'll do is I'll put 1 here. Then I'll start saying all the other cells should just, do like a +1 to the previous one. Right? So to be something like 1, and then this will be this. So the cell before it +1. And that I'll do that like 200 times. Okay, or 199 times. So now I'm going to start with the cell 2 then, because I already have done for 1. And then what I'll do is cell. So I want it to go up. So I'm going to say offset. So it's similar to the offset in Excel. except it doesn't have as much um, options as this one. This one just asks for row, how many row you want to go and how many column, and you can go, if I want to go up, so I'll go, that will be -1, because just putting 1 goes 1 row down. So going 1 row up is -1, and then I want to stick to the same column, so I'm not changing columns, so I'm sticking to the same column. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say cell.value is equal to, so this cell now dot value is equal to the one before it plus 1. I think this should do it. Alright, so this should do it. And then I'm going to run the macro. So let's run it. Great. So it worked. Right? So you see, now we've used for each for that same task. So let's move on to do loop. How do I use do loop for this same thing? So I'm going to, again, I'm leaving all of this there so you can always be able to look through it. These are the core things you need to know. Once you know how these things work, the other problems are minor. The other problems are more of, okay, what is the equivalent code for this in Excel? And like I told you, I use Google search a lot, so I don't try to memorize anything. There are too many things to bother about in life than memorizing computer codes, especially when it's not like I don't have internet to always check for what the code should be like. So let's go use do loop this time around. So how does do work? And in using this, you understand how do works. So I'm going to come back here and say gen num5 create. So the way do loop works is it repeats something. It's more like I'm going to say do this until a particular condition is met, right? So I'm going to also use the dummy variable dim high as integer. So I'm going to say do what now? So do is if I'm using do, then I have to close it with loop and say while. So do while high is less than or equal to 200. So what should it do? I want it to do range. So range here and high dot value equals to high, and then I should come here and initialize the high. So high equals to 1, right? So I've initialized the high to 1, so it's going to start with a1 then equals to 1, and it keeps doing that until high is no longer within this condition, right? So I'm going to click on, let's run it and see. Oh, sorry, greater than. See, I've done something really terrible. As long as I forgot to, you know what's happening? I forgot to auto increment the high. So now I'm in an infinite loop. It's not going to break away, so I have to force it to break. And this is really tricky. If you are using the bigger like a regular PC, the one with the bigger size keyboard, then you will have a break button. Unfortunately, I'm using I'm using a laptop, so no break button. So I'm going to plug in. I have a keyboard. I'm going to plug in. Sometimes if you hold on the escape button for a long time, it might break away, right? But I'm not banking on that today. So I'm going to try and break it. When I say break it, I don't mean go and get a hammer and hit it. I just simply mean, so I'm going to try to break it using break. So control break. this is a terrible problem to have. So I'm going to say, let's. I hope all what I've written, I'm not going to wipe off. Okay, it's going to try to restart. Let me tell you restart. So that's one problem you might face now with okay, so it's restarting. Let me just check if I have any question. Okay, so no questions. Just bear with me. I hope all what I've done so far are saved. So that's one issue, you have to be aware of. That break, it's a really tricky thing. Normally control break is supposed to work, but in my case it didn't. Okay, so I'm going to open the two. I'm going to be praying that it's okay. So let's go check to where it was able to autosave. And that's the really bad thing about it. If for macros, right? It's all my codes are gone. This is really okay. I'm going to regenerate the codes anyway, and I will email to you. So let's just go ahead, right? So what I'll do is I'll regenerate the codes, and then I will send them to you in the file I'm going to share. Because so far, oh, I think I'm in luck. Edit. Good news. Okay, so I think it did up to no, this is not it. Let me go check. Oh, okay, this is it. Yeah, I think I called it book 2. Okay. Really praying that. Oh. So it got missing from for each. So let me just redo the. So I'm going to do the. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm recreating from here. Instead of, you can also redo from here without having to go click on macro and do the new macro, right? So I'm going to call this. So this was the one we had to do for each. So for each was I said dim cell as range, and then I said for each cell in range A2 to A200, and then I initialized this already. So I said range A1 dot value equal to 1. So I said all we need to do here is cell dot value equals to cell dot offset minus 1 to go one row up, and then add 1 to it. I think this was what we did. So let me just run it and see. Okay, so that worked. All right. Maybe at this time, at this juncture, I need to save so that way I don't experience the same issue, because it's not easy writing and explaining at the same time. So all those funny errors can come up. So that brings me to saving, right? Before we move on to, so we are done with this. This was the one I was trying to do. Then there was that issue. So I'm going to save. So when you do save, right? So I'm going to do Control S. When you try to save a macro file, right? So let me save and say I want to browse to my workbook and save. When you try saving, you have to make sure that you are saving as a macro enabled workbook. What do I mean? If not because of the issue we had, Excel will even ask you that there's a macro in it. Do you want to save, yes or no? Always click on do you want to save without the macro? Click on no, so it will let you be able to select this and come here and select the macro enabled workbook. So make sure you always save as macro enabled workbook. It's very important, otherwise you're going to lose the so I'm going to just rename this. So I'm going to call it July webinar practice file. Okay, so I'm going to call it July webinar practice file. The important thing is make sure you always save as macro enabled workbook. That's what I will need you to very sure you do. And so save. Okay, so once you save, all should go really well from now henceforth. All right, so let's go back to the do loop. I'm going to delete this and then macro. So gen num 5. Okay, so gen num 5. Then you see something else that happened this time around. It's created a completely different module for me, no problem. So what I'm going to do is it's because of those minor issues that happened. So that was why I'm having module 1, module 2. I can combine them in the end. So I'm going to combine them in the end, so no worries. I'm going to just go ahead and do the so for do, I said I'm going to dim high as integer. So this is what I mean by module 1, module 2. All those other things I've been doing, they were in here, module 1. But you can combine them. It was because of that. Anytime you save and you reopen, and it will start creating those things in a new module for you. When you close and reopen. So do, I'm going to initialize high equals to 1. Now I'm going to say do and then loop while high is less than or equal to 200. So I need it to just do range a and high dot value equals to high. So this was the step I skipped. I should have auto incremented high. So tell it to add by 1. So that was what made it kept, because this loop was never going to, this condition was never going to be, exited. So that was why I had that issue. So now if I click on run, see, it works as expected. So that's it. So there's no one who is perfect. I make mistakes. This is even a good mistake. It's not a terrible one. I'm able to recover really fast. There are some I make where I made an error in the code and it had deleted something you shouldn't have deleted, and there's something about macro you can't undo, so there's no Ctrl Z I now had to like start all over, like something I've been working on for 3 days. I had to start from scratch. So it's a very powerful thing. That's why we say with them, great power comes a great responsibility. So this thing gives you power, but then you also have to use it responsibly, or else you do a lot of damage. Okay, I'm going to move on to do. So I'm done with. Sorry, I've gone and clicked on something else. Code execution. And okay, so I'm done with that one, right? Let me check if you have any question. So I'm going to go to the do while loop. Yes, so it seems it keeps. So yes, auto recover keeps VBA too. So it keeps VBA codes. That's why that's why it's in a it's a that's why it's a dot xlsb file. xlsb file. It kind of saves everything. So thanks for that question. So going on, I'm going to move on to do while. So for do while, I've been using this method all this while, but really in real life, I don't come here to create, from scratch all over all the time. So I'm going to not use this method. So for do while, let's go straight in and type it in. So all you need to do is simply just say, sub whatsoever you want to call it. So gen num 6 open loop, and that's it. So you don't always have to do that do while. So I'm going to say the same steps anyway. Dim high as integer. I'm going to initialize high, and then I'm going to say, so the difference between do and do while is, do while, as you can see, I'm typing the do while, I put the condition up. So do while high is less than or equal to 200, and then loop. So that will be the only thing at the end, right? And the same thing I wrote there is what I'm going to write here. It's just where the condition is being checked. This one, the condition is, there's one that the condition is checked at the bottom, there's another one the condition is checked at the top, right? So you just decide which one. Use anyone anyway. Dot value, so equal to 1, and I shouldn't make the mistake again, so auto increment by 1, and that's it. So as long as high is within, is not more than 200, this will run. So the same thing too, as long as high is not more than 200, to come back to this do. So it's going to do technically the same thing. Let me delete this, and then let's run this. You know what happened? Great. I should have auto incremented before. So this part of the code should have been no, it's correct. It's here. Yeah. So I put 1 instead of high. So yeah, everything is correct. So let me just run it all over. Okay. Great. So everything is really right. I had mistakenly put in 1 here instead of high. So you see, these are things that happen in real. There's no perfect programming. It's not like you look at a program and then you feel the person wrote it all out perfectly from scratch. There will always be this little snag here and there. You fix it, and that's what makes you very good at it. So all right, so done with this. Let's move on to this, and I've showed you how this works, but maybe I'll show you again anyway. So let's go on to do until. So again, I'm going to straight up come in here and say sub gen num 7, and normally it even ends the sub for me, so I don't need to don't mind my lots of white spaces. Yeah. It's not compulsory, it's just everyone has their own way of doing things anyway. So I'm going to initialize high, but this time around I'm going to say do until high equals to 200, right? And then loop. So for do is always ending with loop. So I'm going to say range A and high dot value equals to high, and don't forget auto increment high. All right, some of you who have some other programming background, you know, you might have seen stuff like this. Well, you can't do this in Excel. Excel VBA does not support this, so you just have to do the, high plus 1. So in case you've ever come across that, and if we are wondering, couldn't we have done that in Excel VBA? Sorry, nope, not allowed. So I'm going to run this, and then I'll check if you have any questions. So run this and see. Again, it works. Oh, okay. I should have said until high is until high is I don't know why it ended in 201. I should have gotten to 200. So let me just check why. So 1. So now, oh okay, yeah, 201. Yes. All right. So because by the time it got to 200, 199, this increments it to 200, and then it comes in here, then it does. But then by the time, so let me just delete and then come back in here, run it, then let's check. Okay, now it's working fine. So again, you need to check once in a while to see your logic code, right? Let's move on to the next one. Let me keep saving so I don't lose anything. So message box, we are almost coming to the end, right? Sorry I've taken so much of our time. Message box is really straightforward. How it works is, if I need to print, let's say I want Excel to show me whatsoever is here, or let me just do it straight up. So sub, let's just call it gen message. So what do I want Excel to do? I want it to just give me a message prompt and say, all right, can you read me? Whatever it is you put in here, it will see. It will pop up in the message box. So if I run this, see, all right, can you read me? And if I want it to read whatsoever was in a, pop up whatever is in a particular cell. So this cell is E1. I can. All I need to do is come in here and say read out for me what is in range E1. So this is what I use for birthday notifications. I mean, I want something that will show me every week my friends that have birthdays that week, and then it should show me as a notification like that, like a pop-up. So that's, I use that, you see. So it will pick their names from the Excel sheet and pop it up, and then say this person has a birthday this particular day. So you can mix them up. So I can do a mixture of what's already in here. So I can say content is, and join it. So the joining in VBA is and. So this is how you join. So if I run this, it's going to show me both of them. See, content is. All right. So that's message box. let's go to the last one, user form. So how do you work with user form in Excel? Well, what are user forms? They are it's the way of you building like a full-fledged application in Excel. So okay, so what I will do right now before I go to that, I'm going to cut out what I have in here and put them in here so you can have everything in one place, right? And then I'm going to delete this module 2. I don't have anything in there anymore, so I'm going to remove module 2. I don't want to export it, so just remove, clear off. Alright, so now user form. User form is really easy to use. All you have to come to do is say insert user form, and this is it. So I can say if I want to create a form where people put in their names, so put in your first name, so your first name, and then I want it to align to the right. Okay, so your name, and I want you to put in a text box, so the box where you're going to type in your name. I can copy this. In fact, let me so I can copy this down, right? So I can copy and then paste and drag this to wherever I want, and I can paste again and drag this to wherever I want. So let's say first name, last name, what else? Maybe your email. First name, last name, your email. Let's, and should I say country? So let's do one more. Country, then let's do submit button. So buttons, button. So button. Submit button. So I usually do 3 buttons. So I call one submit, and to replicate this, you can simply just do control, hold down the control key and drag this, and to create a completely another one. And then I drag, I get another one. So control and drag. Okay, so let me check if any question. Alright, so no questions yet. No questions. So I'm going to quickly just work with this. So I'm going to call this text one. I'm going to call it first name. First name. I'm going to call this one last name. So last name, and I'm going to call this last name. So you can see I'm editing the caption for the labels, and I'm not bothering renaming their names because I don't really need their names to, I don't change things on label most of the time. So it's the text box that I name because I want to be able to grab the content. So that's why I change the name. So in the programming side, I can call up the text box by its name. So I'm going to call this your email. So email, and I'm going to call this text box email, and then I'm going to call this should we say maybe country, and then I'm going to call this country. Okay, I hope you can all still clearly hear me. So can you all still hear me? I hope I'm still audible. Okay, great. So I've named that. I'm going to change this to save. Actually, I start with clear. So I'm going to call this clear button, and then I'm going to call this cancel, cancel, then I'm going to call this cancel, and then I'm going to call this save, and save. Okay, so let me just reduce the size. Okay, so this is good, right? Now, how do I call up this user form? In fact, I can change the name of the user form and say user form, its own caption should be data entry form. So see, that's what shows up here. And then, so how do I make this thing show up here? It's very straightforward, right? If I want it to show up, I can, let's do another button. So I'm going to do a button. I'm going to call it so that button, I'm going to say should be tied to a macro called form, right? So that macro is a new macro because there's no I'm not picking a new macro. So whenever you type a macro name that doesn't exist, that essentially means you're using a new macro, right? So unlike if I had picked on this now, you'll see it, instead of new it shows edit. So but once I type in my own name, the name I want, I get new. So when I click on new, so it brings me this, right? So I can say it should. So the user form I create, see the name, the name of the user form is user form 1. So I'm going to say user form 1 dot show, and that's all. So now what happens is anyone clicks on this button, this user form shows up. So now the thing about this user form is when it shows up, it doesn't let you click anywhere else, right? You only close it before you can click anywhere else in your. And then let me edit the name here. Data form. So there's something I can do about that. I can modify that, right? So if you right click on this same thing you can go to the assign macro. So the macro you assign it, you can edit it. So I'm back in here, right? So all I need to do is say VB modeless. So once you put VB modeless there, what happens is whenever you click on it, it comes up, but now you can also, it doesn't lock your Excel, so you can click on it, you can still go other places, right? So sometimes you might find that useful, except if you don't want people to be able to, do this while they are having the form open. All right, so that's done. So next thing is, I want what should happen when I click on cancel. Let's start with cancel. I like starting with cancel. When I click on cancel, I want the form to close, right? So let's go do that. It's very simple. All I need to do is come back to this programming side, double click on the user form. So when you double click on the user form, it brings out this user form. So double click on the button you want to put a comma, you want to code what should happen when someone clicks on it. So when I double click on this cancel button, it takes me to the code behind. And what do I want to do? I just want it to unload me. That's all. So unload the user form. That's how you close the. So I tell it to just unload me. It's a very simple, straightforward thing. So the data form cancel goes off. All right, so we are almost there. So we are done with that one. What about the cancel one, the clear one? So as per, so clear. What should happen when I do clear? What should happen when I do clear is whatsoever you've typed in here should clear. Let me explain. So I'm here now. I've typed in some things, right? So when I do clear, I want it to clear, right? But now it's not working. So let's go do that. So again, the user form, I double click on clear, and then one by one I start calling up the first name text box dot value. I'm going to make it empty. So that's what I'm going to do for all of the text boxes. Since their names are similar, instead of typing over and over again, I can just So I can just change this to last name, and this is email. So that's why it's good to give them names that are easy for you to remember, so you know which one you're working with. And I think this is country. So that's all. So when you come in here and I type in all those many things and I do clear, they're all gone. So see, very easy to use, right? So let's now go to save. So for save, what should we do for save? So maybe for save, what I want is I want first name to come in here, and I want last name here, I want email here, and I want country here, right? So let's do that. Or should I do here? So I want first name here, last name here, email here, and then country here. Okay, so to do that, it's not difficult at all. All we need to do is go back here, I double click here, and I double click on the save button, and voila. So what do I want? I want it when you click on save that the first name, which is range A14, so I want range A14, so the value in it should equal to the value in the first name text box dot value, right? So it's kind of similar thing I want, for all the three other ones. So this will just be B14, C14, D14, and this will be last name, and this will be email, and this will be country. Okay, so let's try it out, right? It's very straightforward. So usually too, when I'm done, I like to close it, but let's not worry about that. So if I wanted to close it, all I need to do is just say unload me and put it here, so that way you will know it's done, or something that will make the person, so the person doesn't keep doing the same thing thinking, maybe it's not yet done. People like to see, or maybe I say it should just clear once it's done, but that's by the way. So let's populate this. So my name is Michael, last name is this is my email, it's really long, and my country is Nigeria, right? Voila, like magic, right? Okay, so once it's done, maybe it will make sense once it's done that it should clear, right? We'll do that later, but or maybe you should close, whichever one we want you to. If I explain, is really straightforward. Now the next thing I want to show is, what if maybe my brother, so my brother's name is Emmanuel. I hope I got the spelling right. So maybe his own surname is it's a really funny surname, email. olaima@gmail.com. And so once I do save, now there's a problem. It goes and override the one already there, right? So typically this is how you do programming. As you're fixing one, you put yourself in the shoes of the user, okay, and then you fix one problem, you move on to the next user experience problem. All right, so I need to fix that. How do I fix it? Normally, if I was doing this in Excel, I would have come to the next empty cell, right? So how do I find the next empty cell? So that's the trick, and it's very simple. So I need to find just the next empty row. That's what I really need, and the easiest way to do that is to tell Excel to go to the bottom of Excel. So like this, I go to the bottom of Excel and tell Excel to jump up. So after jumping up, it should come down one step, and that's how it will find the next empty row, right? So that is what I'm going to do, and it's very straightforward. All I need to do is come back here. So I'm going to say dim next row, right? As is as long, so I need a really long number because uh, integer, the thing with integer is integer allows up to 32,768 numbers, but you know Excel has up to 1 million plus, so when I'm working with row numbers I would rather dim as long. Okay, so now next row is going to be this. You might need to memorize it, but I've already explained to you how it works. So I'm going to say range. Excel should go to the last, so rows.count. So it will count all the rows in Excel, which essentially means it goes to the last row, right? So Excel should go to the last row. Then I need it to come up. So come up, jump up is Excel hop. In the beginning you needing, that's why I will give you this practice file. You'll be needing to just go somewhere you use it, copy it and bring it. Then the more you use it, the more it's just kind of stick, and then you don't need to copy from somewhere else. So then I say pick that row. So that is the last row actually. So I need it to do +1. That's what will get me the next row, right? So what will happen, instead of me just going straight up and locking it to row 14, I join it to next row. So that's what I'm going to do. Voila. All right, so let's go test it out. Again, data form. And I do save. Voila. See? So this is how it's very interesting. You know, the more you do, the more you find it interesting, and you see that you can do some of those complex things you see people do. They are not really that complex. It's just knowing where the functions are and how to access them. So that now we've come to the end of the webinar, and let me just check if you have any question. So any questions before we round up? And I hope you've learned something new. More importantly, I hope you've seen that VBA is not really difficult, right? You should give it a try. Take something interesting and try to do a VBA around it. It's good to start with something you already do in Excel and see, okay, how can I automate it? And you know, so any questions before we move, or before I terminate the transmission? Any questions? Okay, so if there are no questions, then we'll call it a day. I hope you've enjoyed this month's webinar. We hope to see you next month. And if you have any ideas, suggestions on what you think we should talk about, I'm really open to suggestions. I'll be very grateful, because it's really difficult coming up with something new to talk about. So thank you, and see you next month. So see you next month. I'm going to go and stop the streaming.